Okay, hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the 7th session of the Fall 2020 Sunoikisis Digital Classics program. This session is on using treebanks or using treebanked data, and we are joined by a very large group today. We have presentations from Polina, Yordanova and Marja Vierros from the University of Helsinki, from Vanessa, Gorman from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and from Francesca Dell'Oro from the University of Lausanne. I'm Gabriel Badar, and we're also joined by Monica Berti from the University of Leipzig, who, if you've ever seen Sunoikisis before, you know very well, of course. So the way this is going to go, we're going to have a brief reminder of what treebanking is, and then we're going to have introductions to 3 different projects using treebanked data. There was a session 3 weeks ago, which was a more general introduction to computational linguistics, and an exercise given in that session on actually annotating treebanks. So if you've been following this course, you'll have come across those before. If you haven't, if this is the first, or if you're coming into this out of sequence, feel free to go back to that session and have a look at the exercise if you'd like to know more about treebanking. They've also been presentations on treebanking in previous years. In fact, Polly and Vanessa gave an excellent presentation last year with two very good introductions to treebanking in the Arethusa tool. And then we're going to give you the option to do a couple of exercises at the end of the session on searching and otherwise using treebanked data in various ways. If you're watching us live at this point on Thursday afternoon, the 19th of November, please feel free to say hi using the live chat feature to leave any questions or comments, contribute to the discussion that we have towards the end, and please do so. If you're watching this later and not live, you obviously can't join into the live discussion, but welcome anyway, and we're very happy to have you here, and I hope you're using this in some pedagogical and teaching context, and learning from it as well. So without any more preamble from me, I think I'll hand over to Polly for the general introduction, and then I'm not sure how Polly and Marja are dividing up the first session that they're sharing, so I'll leave them to handle that. So over to you, Polly. You're still muted, Polly.
Yep. Now that's better, I hope.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. So here comes a very brief and by no means in-depth introduction to treebanking, but hopefully it will get us all up to speed so that we can get to the interesting things about how we can use the treebanked data. Treebanking is a shorthand term for the linguistic analysis of a digital text in which the syntactic relations between the words are symbolically represented in a hierarchical graph that resembles a tree, hence the name. A treebank is a parsed corpus, which may also contain annotation of the morphology and semantics of the words, and the most common types of treebanks are created following the rules of constituency or dependency grammar. The difference between the two approaches being that constituency grammar focuses on phrase structure and structures the tree according to that, and dependency grammar focuses on the dependencies between the individual words. Every sentence in dependency grammar has a technical node root to which it is anchored. Usually the head of the tree that is attached immediately beneath the root is the sentence's main verb or a coordinator. All of the words are arranged in the sentence in acyclic head-dependent relationships where they only have one head. They can have one, multiple, or zero dependents. And whenever I say head, I can also use for the same thing the words parent, governor. And for dependent, we can also say child or descendant. I will be using these more or less in a mix and match fashion throughout this session. And words which happen to have the same parent word are called siblings. So we'll get to that later in this presentation. Here we also see some relation labels, which can indicate the syntactic function that the word has in the sentence. Most of the existing large Asian Greek and Latin treebanks are created following the dependency grammar formalism, and a large number of the projects in this list use the Asian Greek and Latin dependency treebanks annotation scheme. Others have their own annotation schemes and practices. The act of tree banking is usually done through a user interface that allows the annotators to create this nice tree structure, while the actual information is recorded backstage as XML format. All trees and snippets from XML files that I'll be showing you from now on are created in the platform Aretusa, which is used by many of the projects previously mentioned and which you can see more of in the previous videos of Sunoikisis. Each sentence is contained within a sentence element, where each word is represented by a word element, and the actual annotation is contained within these attributes, which record the position of the word in the sentence, the form, the lemma, the part of speech tag, which actually has a morphological annotation, where every position in this 9-character string represents a morphological feature, the relation, which is the syntactic function of the word in the sentence, and the head, meaning the word which governs this word. This is how the dependency in the tree is annotated, through matching head and ID attributes. Thus annotated, the tree-banked corpora can be used for all kinds of exciting things, some of which you'll see in the remainder of this session. But how do we do that? A tree-banked corpus is in the form of an intimidating number of XML files with hopelessly many lines of code which have to be queried and sorted. And the process of querying tree banks is notoriously difficult. And currently, there is no single adopted approach towards it, with each project and sometimes each scholar applying their own strategies. Here are some tools that have user interface and can be used for querying tree banks. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There are many others that you can find online. And I won't be going into details about them. I just want to throw them in here for you to check out in case you develop a deeper interest in querying. But at the end of this session, I will be showing you how to use the Iliados tool, also known as structural search, which is super simple and neat, and hopefully it can hook you up on tree banking. Since all these tools come with certain limitations, some scholars have come up with a do-it-yourself option. Some people use BaseX, which has a very powerful XQuery processor. And in previous years of Sunoikisis sessions, you can see Francesco Mambrini showing his awesome-looking graph database, GAGDT. And for my part, as a part of my research within the PapyGreek project, I wanted to experiment with an approach that I had handy at the time and test if it has an application in tree banking. Namely, this is the Kiln platform, which some of you have already met as EFIS in its incarnation for epigraphy and sigillography in session number 3. As far as I'm aware, this is the first attempt of using Kiln for the aims of tree bank research, but I'm hoping that by the end of the work for my dissertation, it will have a well-documented specification that can be used independently as a tool for tree banking queries. In the following slides, I will give you a behind-the-scenes look on how we used it to study a particular linguistic phenomenon in ancient Greek tree banks here in our project, genitive absolute. So the Kiln platform is based on XSLT, which is a language for the transformation of XML documents into, well, better XML documents or into other formats. It reads the raw XML documents locally from the computer. It applies transformation style sheets on them, which provide additional annotation or remove sentences that do not contain the phenomenon that you're currently interested in or whatever you want them to do. Then the so enhanced XML is taken by a templating system that shows the results directly in your browser. So both pre-processing and visualization of the results can be made within Kiln natively, only with the help of some more XSLT. The very first step that I take in my queries is to transform through XSLT the treebank XML from a flat structure where the dependencies between the words are indicated, as I showed you a while ago, with these head and ID matching attributes, to a hierarchical structure which more closely resembles that of the actual tree. This allows me to traverse the vertical axis of ancestors and descendants directly, and it saves me from having to figure out ancestry through these head and ID attributes every time. Here, no information is being lost. The input document stays absolutely the same, but a virtual better XML is created, which is much more straightforward from the point of the computer. Then on to the genitive absolutes. First, we need to figure out what this is, how we tree bank it, how other people whose data we're using might think to tree bank it, and what makes it different from other similarly looking phenomena. In brief, this is a grammatical construction in ancient Greek, similar to the ablative absolute in Latin, which essentially serves as a dependent circumstantial clause, where a participle in the genitive takes the role of the subordinate conjugated verb, and a substantive in the genitive takes the role of the subject. By grammatical rules, this clause is loose, hence the name, from the main clause, in that usually the subject of the genitive absolute is different from the subject of the main predicate. However, in Koine and New Testament Greek, this is not always the case, and Marja will tell you more about that in a few minutes. In its simplest configuration, genitive absolute can be found as a subject in the genitive, directly depending on the participle in the genitive. Sometimes we may have multiple agents, multiple agents governed by the same participle, in which case the subjects are not direct dependents of the participle, but are connected to it through a coordinating conjunction. For brevity, I will be referring to those as types of genitive absolutes, and this is entirely for technical reasons that I've introduced this typology and has no actual bearing on linguistics. So, while the situation with the genitive absolute as illustrated by the previous two types may seem fairly easy and straightforward, real-life Greek has a lot more to offer in terms of variety, as we can see here. In this one sentence, we have not one but two constructions, which both have a single agent, here and here, governed by multiple coordinated participle, 3 and 2 here. By convention, in such cases, the shared agent is appended under the conjunction coordinating the participles, which makes them all siblings in our tree. And sometimes, this should be type 4. Sometimes we have multiple coordinated agents, like here, which are governed by multiple coordinated participles, which, when tree banked according to the practices described in our guidelines, makes the family tree, the family ties, even more complicated. Now, armed with this information, let's see how we can find the genitive absolutes in our corpus. Since querying in XSLT is essentially applying filters that we are running our XML files through, could we perhaps give the genitive absolute construction a specific marker that will allow it to be caught by the appropriate seed? As demonstrated by the examples that I just showed you, the participle and the genitive agent in the genitive absolute construction can participate in one of 4 different types of dependencies. Each word that is satisfying the morphological requirements and is able to reach another potential participant in the construction through a valid path, which means either directly or only through coordinators, is given a group attribute. The value of that attribute is arbitrarily taken to be the value of the ID of the first genitive agent in word order. This allows us to discover and correctly group genitive absolutes even in sentences where we have multiple constructions. And it might also be useful to keep track of the verb governing the construction so that we can write similar rules about it. If the word is a verb, and it can lawfully, meaning directly or through the right kind of coordination, get to a participle that participates in a construction, so it has a group attribute. Give this word an attribute recording which group it governs. Finally, we can create a separate structure in the XML file containing a summary for all of the constructions within it. Information recorded in the attributes here is for the genitive absolute construction that I've been showing you in the previous slides, and is telling us that this construction can be found in sentence 1. It consists of one participle in singular, governing 2 coordinated subjects. One of our agents is in the masculine, the other is in the feminine. One agent appears before the participle and the other after it in word order. And the matrix verb comes before the construction in word order. We can get an overview of this entire pre-processing by looking at the instructions given to Kiln in its sitemaps. The sitemaps are the brains of the platform and are simply lists of instructions for getting, transforming, and serializing XML content. This one is telling Kiln to get a text with the hierarchical XML structure, then apply the style sheets for transforming that XML. These style sheets are long and scary looking, so I will not show them in here, but I'll tell you what they do. The first one annotates the participants in a genitive absolute. The second gives the special attention to the coordinating conjunctions because they require more explicit rules. The third one is for the annotation of the verb governing the construction. The fourth gets rid of sentences that do not contain genitive absolute constructions for more easily managing our giant XMLs. And the fifth one is giving the summary of the information recorded through the previous annotation steps. In the end, a new XML file is created containing all the information for the genitive absolutes in detail and summarized, and this XML can later be transformed with some more accessibility for a nicer visualization and statistics. Similarly, another set of instructions does the pre-processing for the whole corpus. The XMLs for each individual text are all mashed up in one single giant XML that contains information for the entire corpus and all of the genitive absolute constructions in it. Finally, we can visualize all this in the browser through the templating system and have these nice, neat tables without a single angle bracket, all ready for interpretation and conclusions. But here I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger, and I will not tell you what these conclusions are. I will let Marja tell you what we actually found out in this query. And so, Marja, to you.
Okay, thank you, Polly. I will start presenting my slides. Hang on. Okay. Now do you see my slides?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so thanks. I will then continue with presenting for our project's platform in its current state with a demo at the end. But first, as Polly said, I will present results on the genitive absolute study that was mentioned, and Polly showed already all about the queries in Kiln, which are absolutely amazing. And so I will give quite condensed demonstration of the result, and more can be read in this forthcoming article if you are interested in this construction. So as mentioned, we queried genitive absolute structure in different treebank corpora, not only ours, but several others as well. So I'll show first the percentages we obtained for literature from the ancient Greek treebank corpus and Vanessa Gorman's trees. They partly overlap and are the same too, so I smashed the numbers together here in these tables. We see that epic and drama have very low percentage of sentences that have the genitive absolute construction, and the percentage of all genitive absolute structures compared to the number of sentences is a bit higher, but not much. For the classical philosophers, or what you want to call them, the figures rise a bit, and more in Xenophon, who wrote many different types of texts. Oh, wrong direction. For oratory, the numbers rise a bit again, and Demosthenes' speeches clearly make use of the genitive absolute more than the others. When we get to the historians, the earlier ones, Herodotus and Thucydides are basically on the same level as Demosthenes. But then things really explode, well, maybe an exaggeration, but still in later historical writing. So the highest numbers in Diodorus Siculus. It is not all about genre and time, though, since, for example, Josephus is on the same level as Thucydides. These tables, they don't include all the treebanks we looked at. There were other writers as well annotated, but the results clearly showed that the Hellenistic and Roman period historians won the game. Naturally, if more other genres were tree-banked, we might still find something new. But let's turn to the documentary papyri, which is our cup of tea. The small corpus we had in our system during the summer looked like this in respect of the genitive absolute. The biggest chunk of text tree-banked were letters, but within letters, only 11% had one or more genitive absolute structure. And that constituted 19% of all genitive absolutes in the corpus. By far, the likeliest text type to use the genitive absolute was the petition, meaning a document where someone writes to an official like chief of police or even the king, asking that some injustice he has suffered should be inspected and proper action to apprehend the possible criminal should be taken. Then we may note that a quarter of the contracts use the genitive absolute. The amount is quite small, but the likely explanation is that in most cases the genitive absolute there is in the dating formula. So the regnal year, for example, was mostly given through the genitive absolute structure. So as a brief summary, we can say that for literature, genitive absolute was used in historical narrative genre, and especially in Hellenistic and Roman periods. In papyri, the genitive absolute was mostly used in petitions, which consists of clearly historical narrative part. And then everyday private letter writing had actually no place for the genitive absolute. More official letters could make use of it. So one of our research questions was to trace the usage of the genitive absolute in speech. And it seems that it was not used in that way or in those text types that we could consider reflecting spoken features most. And another reason we started looking at this construction was the question of the absoluteness. So it has been claimed, like Polly mentioned, that in Koine, the non-absolute, non-classical way of using was common and should not be treated as a genitive absolute gone wrong, but to be studied in its own right in this time. If the genitive absolute is absolute, its subject does not play a role, syntactic role in the matrix clause. For papyri, it has been said that a version where the subject of the genitive absolute and the subject of the matrix clause coincides is very common. An example of one such case is at the bottom of the slide. There is a first person singular pronoun as the subject of the genitive absolute, and first person singular is also the subject of the verb in the matrix clause. But this absoluteness is a feature that actually cannot fully be searched computationally. And a qualitative analysis on the papyri suggests that around 20% were not absolute, so the estimations are perhaps a bit exaggerated that Koine would use or papyri would use only these types of genitive absolutes. However, our study focused on a small part of only of what could still be studied in this construction by using treebanks, like also Polina's dynamic table showed. For example, we could also study the tenses of the participles, the agents, part of speech, the distances of the agent and the participle from the matrix predicate or from each other, to mention just a few aspects. Okay, that was for the genitive absolute. Now, in our backward way of presenting today, I'll give a brief overview of our project, PapyGreek. Here's our logo, and on the right you see our fresh PapyGreek puppy, carefully inspecting trees there. So here is our team and the project's website address, as well as the address for our platform on the bottom of the slide. In the platform, there are many different functionalities, and I have to emphasize it is a work in progress. The variation part is a search interface, mainly designed for autographic queries, but we can also do some simple searches on the trees there. In Sematia, the papyrus texts from Duke databank, papyri.info, are pre-processed for tree banking, and we have integrated the Perseids project's great annotation tool, Aretusa, in the platform. And we built our trees with it using the HEDT guidelines. We also add some metadata that is not present in the Duke data, basically on the writers, authors, addressees, and text types. So the autographic search tool Paratypa I will demo soon, but here are the key points. It's based on the Epidoc XML, where the editorial corrections are marked up. So a misspelled word is regularized by the editor in the apparatus criticus. And so we can search those regularizations in comparison with the what the original writer has written, and often then make some interpretations on how the pronunciation has developed on the basis on these misspellings. Since phonology is our main interest with this, it's also important to be able to define those letters that immediately precede or follow those spellings. And this search interface allows us to do it very dynamically. Here on the right is a screenshot with the iota-cistic spelling, iota instead of epsilon iota. And to be able to say what kind of numbers are meaningful, we can also search for unchanged strings of letters. So if the text that editors have not corrected. Here I would not advise searching just simple letters, or it would be better to use longer string of letters to keep the search functional. On the Sematia part, the text from the Epidoc XML is pre-processed into two versions. The original is presenting what the papyrus actually says, and only what survives there. The regularized layer is the editorial ideal of the text, with gaps filled and abbreviations opened up and misspellings corrected. Those you see highlighted in the screenshot in the text, yellow and red. When this text is tree-banked in Aretusa, we make use also of the automated morphological analysis of Alec Keesmakers from Leuven. The automatic syntactic part we have only tested with a little. It will perhaps be included later on. So then the annotator would only need to check if that annotation, automatic annotation, is correct and make necessary changes and possibly make some deletions in the original layer. Here's how the annotations differ in these two layers. In the regular, also parts that are in gaps are annotated, but in the original, they are not. Here, the name Apollonius has a gap within the word, but is secure enough for annotation. Kairein is left out from the tree by the annotator, but it's there in the regularized side. The dative case in Dimiotato is marked in the regularized side, but in the original papyrus, the case ending is in the lacuna, so we do not mark it up in the original layer. Okay, so in the demo, we will look at the eternal question of the loss of the dative case, its replacements by other cases, and here we look at the genitive, but only as regards the second declension. And I should say that this demo simplifies this question a lot, but this is just for the sake of demonstration, demonstrating the tool a bit. So I will now go to the PapyGreek portal. Do you see this now?
Yes.
Good. So here you can use the variation search tool without signing in. The sign in is when you want to annotate texts and do a little bit more with those. I will sign in just in case. Anyway, so the variation tool is here. We call it paratypa. We're interested now how the second declension ending U and O have been used to replace one another. Can we say that the reason is due morphology? Is there a morphological confusion where the roles of the genitive and dative are not so clear? Or if there is more likely phonological resemblance of the case ending being the cause in the second declension, which is a big group of words. So we can try searching these letter groups. So here we use, is this big enough, by the way? Do you see what I'm doing?
If you could make it a little bigger, that might help.
Okay. So for some reason, okay, I was using wrong buttons. Now it's really big.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking the ending OU and O, and here we are using the replacement button. We can first look at what if we just have these letters here. By the way, here is the help tab where you can find more explanations how this works. So we can just search with these letters, press search. Enter doesn't work here. You have to press the button. So it gives us 1,500 plus entries where we see that the original writer has written OU and editor has regularized it as O, so that it would be dative. So here is a list, and we could organize this list by date or by place or whatever we can think of. Now, as a preset, it's chunking this by the original. But we want to look at the ending of the word. And by the way, I didn't click any of these arrows here. If we look at the second page, we can see that it actually takes a little bit things that have the OU and O, but have also something more. So if we want to confine the search to be strictly on these letters, that the replacement is strictly these letters, we click these arrows pointing towards what we are searching. So now we have 1,200 entries, and now it gives us basically only these interchanges. If we want to look at the word endings, these arrows actually are kind of regex regular expression codes made simple here, the $sign and the caret sign, meaning the end of string and beginning of string. If we want to have an end of the word with this variation, I can click also the after box so that it's empty, putting both of these arrows inside. And now we get only the ends of the words. So it's about 1,000. So already this, that we had 1,200 entries, and now we have 1,000 in the end of the word, tells us that this interchange mainly happens at the end of the word. So it's kind of already telling us that it's not common phonological error, but it's happening at the end of the word. So it's probably morphological confusion that we are dealing with here. And then we could also look the date here. So since the papyri are mostly dated, we can make a crude distinction with the BCE. If I put -1 as the last point that we want, and also strictly those that are strictly dated to this period. Okay, only 18 come from BCE, and all the rest come from later on. And we could, of course, then try later periods with smaller chunks of time and see when it starts to become more common. So if this is more morphological, we could also try to use the Treebank material we have. And I'm telling you now that we don't have that much at the moment, especially not much from the later periods. And as we saw that this doesn't happen much in Hellenistic period, so we probably don't get many results, but still I will show you how to do it. Now we will switch here to the tab Any, then we can search the Treebanks. It could perhaps be named differently. But now we can use the post-tag polymention, for example, to find these. So we would want to have the original part have the noun and singular masculine genitive. Of course, we also would need to do these things the other way around, what's in also in the phonological part. Let's have the singular there as well, and here the dative. So this is where these differ. Let's not limit the date. Okay, we have 6 in our corpus, that 6 texts where we have a genitive written instead of dative masculine singular. And 2 of these actually are from BC era. And in those you can see that actually the writer is the same. So this is one person who has been writing this with this case confusion. So this was PapyGreek in a nutshell, only a small portion of it. And once we have more data annotated evenly from different centuries, I think it will prove to be more and more useful. That's our hope, at least. So thank you. That was my part.
Thank you, Marja and Polly. That's great. That's great. Shall we move directly on? People can ask questions and make any comments towards the end. Let's move directly on to, I think, Vanessa's presentation next. I'll
All right.
hand over to you,
Well,
Vanessa.
good morning from my part of the world. Good afternoon to yours. I want to thank Gabby and the other people at Sunoikisis for inviting me to present again this year. I always enjoy taking part in this. And I want to preface my comments by saying I'm going to show you some of this material in action for classicists. So I am a classicist, I'm a humanist. I have no specialty in programming. I can deal with a little HTML code, and that's about the limit of it. I happen to collaborate with someone who has learned to use XQuery and R, and who is my husband. And so I am a big believer in that the future of the humanities is collaborative. I've spent 35 years learning Greek. I don't want to learn R right now, but he chose to. I think we should be working together across fields all the time, and use our specialties, and it helps to broaden the questions you ask. I mean, we can ask questions we couldn't ask 10 years ago, and we can approach questions, excuse me, old questions in new ways. And that's kind of what I'm going to do today. Can we move over to my slideshow? I don't know. There we go.
Yeah.
We're on the slideshow now. Great. So what I'm doing today is applying the methods that we can have developed using the Treebank data in order to deal with a question of authorship, of disputed authorship. And as you well know, corpus linguistics is a burgeoning field today. And essentially it means you take some natural language, you derive a set of abstract rules about how it functions that are descriptive, and then you compare them within a language or across languages to study how that language works, and to study stylistics and prose development and natural language processing, and to teach computers about languages, and to analyze historically changes in language. And I'm using it for pedagogy. And of course, author attribution is basically a form of classification. So in previous years, I would call myself a hardcore philologist. I did a lot of microanalysis. So my husband and I co-authored a book that came out in 2014 about corrupting luxury, where we looked at every single passage of that contained the word trufe, a word for luxury, sort of, and explored questions of author attribution about Hellenistic historians who are quoted in later authors, especially Athenaeus, and basically drilled down with a micro-analysis of the meanings of words in every single use of those words in Greek literature. So now we're turning from that to macro-analysis or corpus linguistics, and trying to do the big picture, let the computer tell us what the results are instead of trying to judge it piece by piece. And so, as some of you know, I've been hand annotating Greek prose for the last 6 or 7 years now, and I've got something like 600,000 tokens now available on GitHub for people to use, and I'm happy to see that the PapyGreek project is using it so effectively. It's a much easier way to analyze Greek than I think than the constituency grammar, using this dependency grammar. But to do this kind of analysis, first thing, you need that depository, and so that's there. But then you also have to know how to use statistical programming and manipulate the data, which my husband has learned. But I would propose that we should be talking to each other more and working more with computer scientists and humanists together. We've published some early results of some general studies on author identification, and these are on the site for today's class session. 2 results about using dependency trees without vocabulary, because that's what we're trying to do. So the specific program we are applying to this at the moment is the authorship of this one section of a work by Xenophon called the Cyropaedia, the Education of Cyrus. And it's the very last chapter of this work. And since the 18th century, scholars have doubted its authenticity. But frankly, today the consensus is that it is genuine. And you can look up the arguments in Tatum and in Windsor Sage, but basically these arguments are based on the themes that are covered and sort of gut instinct about prose style. And it's really not a very scientific approach. It really does come down to instinct about the author. So since then, Field has done a digital analysis of the vocabulary for her dissertation at Princeton back in 2013. And she also decided that Xenophon was the author, but the problem with her study is that she was doing what corpus linguistics people typically do, which is she was looking at vocabulary or n-gram studies. And n-gram studies are not necessarily very accurate for Greek if various authors are writing on the same subject. So if you have the same vocabulary in use. And that's something we wanted to correct for, because frankly, the seminal author on this is Ader, who has done studies across many languages based on n-grams and trying to decide when you can determine the authorship of a section of prose, and he's done this in many languages. So I just pulled out his chart about Greek prose. And he was using computer parsed banks of data. So of course there's an accuracy problem there. I mean, I think the best computer parsing gets about 80% accuracy. And he used both passages, as you can see, and bag of words, which is to say just random selections from a larger sample. And for the Greek language, he decided that you needed at least 2,000 words to achieve anything like useful results. So you can see that once you get down to below 2,000 words, the accuracy falls off a cliff. But I also want you to note that above 2,000 words, his accuracy is running around the 90% mark or the high 80s. So it's not as high as one would like. So we thought about trying to use this, but the problem is Cyropaedia passage in question is only 1,400 words. And so that's not going to work very well in his system. We'd only get a 60% accuracy anyway. Okay, so that's the setting of our problem. So we decided to approach the same problem using essentially the same methods, but using syntactic data instead of vocabulary data. And so you've seen these trees, and what I did was I have treed several books of other works by Xenophon, the Hellenica particularly, the history of Greece after ending the Peloponnesian War and subsequently. And I also made trees of the first book and the last book, book 8 of the Cyropaedia. So we'd have a hunk of about 20,000 words to deal with. And for each word, as you've already seen, you have certain information. You've got the form, the lemma, the post tag, the relation, the head. And we kind of arbitrarily decided to grab bits that include 4 things. One would be to choose a word, choose its part of speech tag, and choose its relation. So this word is the predicate, which is a verb, third singular, aorist indicative middle, and to choose its parents or, well, in this case, you choose a word and you choose its parent. So the first word we would choose is word 1, which is the subject of the sentence. It's a noun, singular, feminine, nominative. It is hanging on the parent number 4, which is the main verb. So for this word, we got 4 pieces of information: its part of speech, its relationship, its parent's part of speech, and its parent's relationship. And this we did for every word. And Bob used X query and R to get this sorted out. And he, sorry, I got to find out where I am here. he tried several methods. So one thing he tried was he used clustering. So this is basically, you take hunks of words, and we started with 13 prose texts of Greek that date from all time dates. These were the 13 that I had treed by the time he started doing this. And they each represent at least 20,000 tokens. And he decided to do a bag of words selection, and he took 400 word hunks. And then just let the computer group them together as it saw fit. Now, this isn't a very accurate, sophisticated method, but it does let you know if it's worth pursuing. And the resulting dendrogram looked like this. Now, the principle in reading this is the longer the vertical line, the further apart the texts are. So the most diverse texts are divided right here. So on one side, we have Polybius, Diodorus, and Dionysius, which all makes sense because they are later authors writing in the Roman era, writing histories. Whereas on this other side, we have another big division here between orators and Thucydides. It's interesting, Thucydides tends to be grouped with the orators, but he's further apart than the orators are from each other. And then we have another couple of big hunks that are made up of various other historians, including some late ones, which is kind of puzzling. But you see how this works. This tells us that something, this tells us that just bag of words is pretty good at grouping same authors with same authors, and authors in the same genre with authors in the same genre, and even in the same time frame. So it's worth pursuing this. And so our results here, where the orators were clumped together, Thucydides was close to them, the Roman writers were late. The problem children are Josephus and Xenophon. Josephus and Appian were the furthest apart, but we have to decide why. And that's something that is another study we haven't gotten to yet. But the problem is every time we look at something, we see more things to look at. So now if you mix this questionable passage into the mix, and we're calling it author X, and throw it into the same program and make the same dendrogram, you get pretty startling results, because author X is over here by itself, further away from everything else that has been treed than anything. It is completely the odd man out here. This is just startling. It's a huge distinction. It doesn't look like Xenophon, and it doesn't look like anybody else here. So clearly we have something worth investigating. And so we decided to do something a little bit more sophisticated next, which was classification, where you train the computer on 90% and test it on 10%, and then make the division 10 times and run each of them 100 times. So you get rid of most of the noise. And Bob did this for his 2019 article, where he ran prose authors again, the same 13. He did not include the Cyropaedia because it wasn't done at that time, but he did include the Hellenica. And you see that this turns out to be a really accurate method of distinguishing authorship. With text sizes of 2,000, the accuracy rate was 100%. There were no mistakes. And for all intents and purposes, there are few mistakes until you get down to 700 word hunks. And you don't even drop below 99% until you get below 300 word hunks. Now, these are bag of words. These are still using bag of words. But that's a remarkable accuracy rate, with the computer deciding what are good discriminators using only the syntactic data. And just to give you a little more perspective, because I like visual things, this was Ader's graph of what is useful, and this green line is our graph. So even at 50 word hunks, we are still at or better than what he gets with 2,000 words based on vocabulary rather than syntax. So clearly this is a much more accurate way to approach the problem. So then we also decided to run these same 13 prose authors against the Cyropaedia section that is in doubt. And he went with text hunks down to 300 words. And the fact is, author X was never, ever assigned to Xenophon. He was always put with Thucydides. So clearly we have something very strange going on. We know Thucydides didn't write it because Thucydides came before Xenophon, but whoever wrote it was modeling Thucydides more than he was modeling Xenophon, for what it's worth. Now, what are our conclusions here? Well, first off, we know that author X is unlike the rest of books 1 and 8 of the Cyropaedia, and he is most similar to Thucydides using the bag of words method. So another approach now is, what if we use contiguous text? So what if we use hunks that are rolling windows within the text and look at what is called the Euclidean distance, which I can't explain, but if you want more of an explanation, I'm sure Bob would be happy to. So essentially you take a continuous hunk of 1,400 words, because that's the size of the questionable text, and you start at the beginning of the Cyropaedia book 1 and shift it 10 words and shift it 10 words and shift it 10 words, and you link up book 1 and book 8 like a snake eating its tail, so that we have a rolling window all the way through, and then you compare it stylistically to the whole of 1 and 8, and you get a graph that looks like this. Now, what you see is we get a big jump here at 8.8. Now, it's interesting, we also get several other big jumps here, here, and especially at the beginning. So some oddity is going on. The passage at the beginning is the one that's going to really grab our attention. And the reason for that is, and we're calling this author Z, this is book 1, chapter 2. The reason we're doing that is when you take all of this rolling window and instead of comparing it to the rest of book 1 and book 8, you compare it just to the questionable part at the end, 8.8, the part we're working on, you get this. So 8.8 is itself, so it's going to be 0. The rest of this has a consistent difference until we get to 1.2, when it also comes down. So it is more like 8.8 than it is to the rest of the text. So what's going on here? Just to represent the same material in a different way, let me show you a heat map based on this to show you what is most similar. So things that are red are exactly the same, things that are white are close, and things that are blue are very different from each other. And so if you see it this way, you see author X is in green in the two corners, and author X is itself, so it's red up here. And it is white compared to author Z, and it's blue compared to everything else. And the same thing with author Z here. It is red against itself, and it is white against author X, and it's blue against everything else here. So clearly what we have are two passages that don't belong with the rest. Whereas the other bumps in the rolling window study are more like the rest than this. So again, if we go back to the tree and if we go, or the dendrogram, and throw it back in the dendrogram, we get similarly startling results in that author Z is closer to author X than it is to anything else, including the rest of Xenophon. And they are very, very far apart. So this is just a fascinating result to us. We can conclude that author X, the part that people have been questioning, is most dissimilar to all the other passages in the graph. And unlike the books of rest of book 1 and book 8, except that it is fairly similar to 1.2. More like it than anything else on the graph. Okay, now we come to yet another question that these results have given us, which is, what's normal variation within one author? So what is normal? What can we say is just noise within an author? And this is yet another way to take this study. And we took book 1 of Thucydides, book 1 of Herodotus, books 1 and 2 of Polybius, because we happen to have both of them, and then these 2 books of the Cyropaedia, and made the same chart. And you'll notice that each of them has spikes, and the highest spike for each author is marked. One thing I will have you notice that if we hadn't included book 2, Polybius would be fairly consistent in the green line here. Polybius spikes in book 2. So what do we make of this? Because this looks odd. Well, what I did was I checked what these spikes were. Now in Xenophon, this spike at 1.2 is a place where the author goes off on a diversion to talk about how the Persians educated their sons. It has nothing to do with Cyrus. And so it's a kind of an aside or a diversion. If we look at Herodotus 144.1, it is also a diversion about the background of the Ionian cities. Polybius is a diversion about food production and geography in Cisalpine Gaul. So Thucydides is probably the odd man out here because his is the passage about the death of the Spartan king Pausanias, where they walled him up into a temple and took him out at the last minute. So there's lots of diversions in these authors. They're not all spikes, but some are. And so now we're left with, of course, more questions than answers, because we need to look at stylistic variations within an author. And so what we've decided is we're going to pursue Xenophon, because in the Greek prose, there's really not a lot of difference in genre in most writers. My thought is Xenophon writes in more genres than anyone else. Plutarch writes in several genres, but I'm more interested in the earlier classical Greek. So we want to pursue by doing more trees of more works of Xenophon and comparing them to each other. And also, I'm curious just to compare speeches and narrative in Thucydides. So I want to go through and just tag sentences, whether they're direct speech or narrative, and then compare those as different works. Our author attribution studies continue. Bob just submitted an article to Digital Humanities Quarterly where he used computer parsed trees in a number of different languages today using open access works of literature, and found that even in a language as little inflected as English, he was getting much better results with the same method as people using n-grams. I'm also wanting to compare Demosthenic speeches with the pseudo-Demosthenic speeches that are usually attributed to the author Apollodorus, particularly. They think the same guy wrote them. So I'm also working on getting those treed. Of course, COVID has gotten in the way of all of this because I've mostly just worked on pedagogy lately. There's a lot of potential for prose composition questions. For example, I thought it was very interesting listening to Polly speak about genitive absolutes, or sorry, that was Marja speak about genitive absolutes, because I have thought just in the process of treeing Greek that late Greek reminded me of Latin, and it reminded me of Latin because of this tendency to use genitive absolutes so often and use participles so often in that form. And that was just my gut feeling doing the trees, and I'm glad to see that they're getting some of the same results. And I would love to see a good tree bank of Latin that we could compare it to at some point. Computer language learning, the Pedalian project, we're working with Toon and Alec. They're pre-parsing trees for me these days so that I can work faster, and then I give them my corrected trees for them to use. And of course, pedagogy, I'm designing an online open access course. It's not in good shape right now, but I'm going to be using it next semester to learn ancient Greek using the Alphaeus tool and this Arethusa platform in an open access way. I've collected a little bit of bibliography. Most of it's on the class web page. I've got an article, a data article in the Journal of Open Humanities Data that just points you at my dependency tree website, or on the GitHub dependency tree repository, I should say. So thank you very much. I'll turn it back to Gabby.
Thank you, Vanessa. That's great. We should race on, and I'll hand over directly to Francesca. Again, we'll have discussion and questions at the end if we have a bit of time. You're still
Okay.
muted, Francesca. There you are.
Okay. So today I'm going to outline how we are using Treebanks in the WOPOS project to automatically annotate a corpus of Latin texts. I will show how we are using a natural language processing package called Stanza. Stanza was developed by Stanford researchers in the field of natural language processing in order to automatically annotate texts. Then I will show some examples of automatic annotation on Latin, and if there is time, also Greek texts. And finally, I will draw some conclusions about advantages and disadvantages of the automatic annotation from the point of view of our annotators. As background information, I want to stress that the focus of our project WOPOS is not the automatic annotation, but the reconstruction of modal paths and the diachrony of the Latin language. To reach this goal, we carried out a manual annotation of modal passages, that is, passages containing modal forms. To put it in a simple way, modal forms are forms expressing necessity, possibility, or probability. You see some example: possum, debeo, risibilis, facendus, forsitan. Here you can see a manually annotated modal passage. I'm not going into the details of the modal annotation. The slide is just here to show what we do when we find a modal passage. So we identify a modal passage, such as here, non poterat loqui ad illos, he couldn't speak to them. And we add information about the modal form, poterat, what someone can do, in this case, to speak to them, what type of entity can do something, here in this case, Zacharias, so an animate entity. And we look if there is a negation or not, and we add this kind of information. And of course, we also analyze the relation between the modal form and what we call the scope unit. But in order to properly analyze modality, we need more linguistic information. Just a change in the tense of a verb can be dramatic for modality. If I say potest loqui, someone he can speak, I am referring to his capacity to speak, or also more generically to the fact that there is for someone the possibility to speak at the present moment. But if I just change the tense from present to past, I say potest locutus esse, the reading of capacity is not prominent anymore. So if we translate it, he may have spoken, the speaker formulates a hypothesis about what someone has done in the past, and it is not a statement about ability or capacity in the past. That's to say that we need to combine the modal analysis with other levels of linguistic analysis. Now you can see a complete analysis of the modal passage from Luke. We added lemmatization. This is in the light green box, loqui as loquor, as lemma. We add parts of speech tagging. This is in the yellow box, loquor is a verb. We add the morphological analysis. This is in the dark green box, where it is written morph-phi, morphological features, and then you can see the visualization of this dark green box. And so you see that this is analyzed as an infinitive presence active. And then we also need the dependencies that you can see on the right side. But in our project, we have not enough time, and we have not enough annotators to manually annotate all levels of linguistic analysis. So our solution was to indirectly use Treebanks to carry out an automatic analysis of lemmas, parts of speech, morphological features, and the dependency parsing. The automatic annotation is made possible thanks to a natural language processing package called Stanza. Stanza was developed by the Natural Language Processing Group of Stanford, and it is used to convert a string containing human language text into lists of sentences and words to generate base forms of those words, their parts of speech and morphological features to give a syntactic structure dependency part. It works at the moment for more than 60 languages, and it is compatible with universal dependencies. As you know, this is universal dependencies provides a universal standard of annotation across human languages. Stanza works starting from raw, non-annotated text, which then passes through processors that analyze it on different layers. You can select the processors you need. For example, we use the processors for tokenization and sentence split, the one for lemmatization, the one for parts of speech and morphological tagging, and finally the one for dependency tagging. For dependency parsing. Subsequently, Stanza generates a new document that displays the text given in input and the automatic annotation produced on that text according to which processors you selected. The processors work on the base of pre-trained models. A model is the result of a machine learning process based on artificial neural networks. The model is trained on annotated data such as Treebanks. The models in Stanza were trained on the universal dependencies Treebanks. For Latin, there are 3 Stanza models, ITTB, which is also the default model, Perseus and Proyel. And for ancient Greek, there are 2 Stanza models, the Proyel model, which is also the default model, and Perseus. All this means that we don't work directly with the extant Treebanks, but we use them in an indirect way. At the top of the schema, you have the Treebanks. Then, as an intermediate step, you have the work of the Stanford NLP researchers who created the models and Stanza. And then you have our final use. We use Stanza to create automatically annotated text, and then our annotators annotate them manually for the semantics of modality. So here you can see a calculation of the performance of the models. I have made a selection of tasks. If you are interested, you can go and see the results for each task. So on the whole, we can say that the Stanza packages is very promising. There are for example, if you look at tokenization, this is something which seems to work very well for each model. And there are other tasks which are more problematic. So, for example, sentence splitting, sometimes also lemmatization. So it depends on the task and also on the models. So now I'm going to show some examples and look at the advantages and problems of using this automatic annotation with different types of text. We also prepared an exercise in GitHub, which allows you to compare the 5 different models, and you can choose the text that you want to analyze. So now we are going to see how a model works with different types of text, a literary text, and then an inscription. For Latin, we will use the Perseus model, and for Greek, we will use the Proyel model. And the choice is arbitrary. I could have taken any other of the models. So let's begin with Ovid, the beginning of the Metamorphosis. In nova fert animus mutatas dicere formas corpora, My mind leads me to speak of forms changed into new bodies. It is not at all easy to analyze this line, also for a human being. And you see that the adjective nova and the noun corpora are in distant places, so in two different lines. And you can see that nova is recognized as an adjectival modifier, but it is wrongly attributed to formas. What we do in this case, we manually correct these problems. So here you can see an instance of correction at the level of the dependency labels. So here we corrected the dependency relation of the participle mutatas from nominal modifier to adverbial clause. But on the whole, you can also see that the model is not completely wrong. Of course, you have to correct things, but on the whole, it works. Now let's see another example with Old Latin. So the text comes from a very ancient document, the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, which dates back to 186 BCE and contains many archaic forms, which the system doesn't recognize. And I have also to say that the syntax is not really straightforward. So the text I have taken is Utei ad praetorem urbanum Romam venirent. In classical Latin, ut ad praetorem urbanum Romam venirent. They are to come to Rome, to the praetor. So here the conjunction utei was not recognized as such. The model suggests that it is a noun, and it is a lemma from Uteus, which is clearly invented. And the lemma should be ut, and as a conjunction, we shouldn't have morphological features. Now, let's take a look at praetor. I have to precise that in the text, we only have PR, so we have the abbreviation for praetor, but it seems sure that we have to intend it as praetor with I and not with praetor with E, and this because of other forms which appear in the same inscription and have I and not I. So we see that it was correctly analyzed from the point of view of the morphological analysis, and also from the point of view of the parts of speech tagging. And as a lemma, the system suggests praetor, which is not completely wrong if you consider praetor as the archaic variant of praetor with the E. And of course, it is better to have both forms under one and the same lemma. And so in this case, we choose the classical variant with E, so praetor. I don't know if there is time also to look at the Greek examples. Gabi?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So this passage is the Greek parallel of the Latin text of the Gospel of Luke I showed you before. Exelthon de uke dunato lalesai autois. When he came out, he couldn't speak to them. Here we can see that on the whole, the automatic annotation is good, but sometimes there are things that went wrong. So for example, here a problem is edunato, which is not from didumi, of course, but it is from dunamai, and there are some labels missing. So for example, aspect imp, imperfective is missing, and also the tense is wrong. It should be just past and not what is written, perfect. So let's now see a final example, and also this time from a Greek inscription, the Marmorparium, an inscription from the 3rd century BCE. In this case, I want to take a look at proper nouns, and proper nouns can be problematic. In this very same sentence, it is nice to see how the system sometimes recognizes a proper noun correctly and sometimes not at all. So the text I have chosen is Afou Deukalion, Paraton Parnasson, and Lucoreiai e Basileus, from the time Deucalion became king on Mount Parnassus in Lycoria. So we see that Parnasson and Lucoreiai are correctly recognized as proper nouns, but not Deucalion. And probably this is because of the ending ion, and so the form was recognized as a comparative, and in fact it is analyzed as an adjective with the could be. This is just an hypothesis. So and then you see also the dative Lucoreiai, which poses a specific problem as in the corpus which was used to train the model. Iota appears as iota subscriptum, so the model had no examples of a dative with the iota non-subscriptum, so it is normal, so to say, that it recognizes as a nominative feminine plural as an ending I, and not as a dative. So to sum up and to conclude, we can say that the automatic annotation is very useful for our project. Most part of the linguistic analysis is already done when the annotators start their work. And this is great because then they can concentrate on the semantic analysis of modality. The main disadvantage is that it is not possible to predict where there will be errors. So our annotators for each text and for each sentence need to be very, very attentive. Thank you. If there is time, but I'm not sure, I just wanted to show us our annotators, and I would like to thank Paola Maronjo and Elena Bermudez-Sabel, who contributed to this presentation. And then at the end, you will find the references, and thank you now.
Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you.
That's great. Cool. So thank you all very much. We have taken a little longer than we had originally scheduled for this. That was probably no individual's fault. I think everybody needed a little bit more than 20 minutes to present their projects in to do justice to their project. So if anyone, that was mine and Polly's fault for trying to squeeze too many people into the session. But I don't think that's a problem. If you can all stick around for a few more minutes, we can still have a little bit of discussion and questions. And probably, to be fair, let's we've got a few questions already in the live chat, which we can pull a couple of them up. The first question was actually from me. I'll just put it there so that I didn't forget it. When you showed Marja the search across all papyri showing like 1,500 results, and then just the BCE papyri showing a tiny number of results, to put that in context, I needed to have a sense of how many Greek papyri, what proportion of Greek papyri are BCE. I expect not a very large proportion.
No, but still, I can't tell you actual figures now, but there's a curve that the sort of 3rd century Xenon papyrus archive from the BCE era has several thousand papyri. Then the curve goes down when we go to the turn of the era, and most papyri come from the 2nd century CE. But still, that gap, I mean, that 18 really is showing that this doesn't happen in the Hellenistic times. I mean, there would be lots of text. there as well.
Yes.
So it's not
so there was
that big
another
difference.
question was also for you, which was, could you explain very briefly again the difference between the 1,000 results when you searched for the characters and the only 18 results when you searched under the tab any?
No, the 18 came from just the limit of the time. That was still using the whole corpus, whole
or the 10 or 11,
orthographic
whatever it was, the
part.
tiny number of results.
And with any,
yeah,
it was
yeah.
just
So what was the
6
difference between those
results
two searches?
Yeah.
The one the one for U versus O and the one you did under any.
Well, under any, that was targeted to the annotated texts, but there was at that point only 6
and that was because you have a
for
smaller
any time
corpus,
period.
And you were
yes, yeah, and because most of our corpus is BC.
Great, thank you. There's then a bit of discussion in the thread. Sorry, I've made my window very small, so I can't really read it. There's a bit of discussion in the thread on stylometry, which I think so this question has been partly answered in the live chat, but Vanessa might want to address it out loud as well. This is Alexandra's question. Could your method be used, given that you can find good results with such small pieces of text? Could you find citations using this? I
would think so. I would think you'd be able to. I mean, we came at this through Athenaeus, being frustrated that he quotes so often, and yet we knew from the vocabulary of quotes that he's not quoting, he's doctoring these quotes. And that's basically the big theme of our book on corrupting luxury, is that in fact, we give kittens to a lot of historians because we argue that the Hellenistic historians are not moralistic. Most of that's based on what Athenaeus has added to them in his so-called quotes. And so we were trying to figure out a way to be able to use even small quotes of like a dozen words a sentence and get any kind of authorship attribution. And frankly, even with small quotes, we get better than 50%. But the problem is we keep getting distracted. And we have no grad students to put on these tasks. So we have about, 50 different projects we could get going on, and we keep jumping from one to another without finishing them. So I would like to get, like I say, I want to work on this Xenophon project, but I also want to work on this Demosthenes project. And I'm also developing this pedagogy project. And there's COVID, and there's only so many hours of the day. And we haven't, I don't know if we'll ever get back to Athenaeus, which was the original start of this. But the idea of, especially these later authors that like to quote, and there's a real question, people through, most of this, our profession, just take these quotes for granted as quotes, and they don't look at them with the kind of critical, skeptical eye that they need to. And we've shown with our book that you've got to look at their vocabulary critically, but now with these syntactic studies and stylometry studies, the results are really spectacular in the sense that this addition at the end of the Cyropaedia and the bit at the beginning are not only not written by Xenophon, I would conclude, but they're also written by someone who doesn't look like anyone else we have surviving. And so I would argue this is probably a late author having added these that is, like I say, the closest it comes is to Thucydides. So someone writing in a deliberately Thucydidean fashion, perhaps, or maybe that's coincidence, but clearly there's a consistency between the two, but they don't look like anybody else we have. And that to me, immediately I start thinking this is the difference in the time frame, because I know that Greek changes over time. And we saw with the genitive absolute study that Greek changes over time and is, I think, really heavily influenced by Latin in the genitive absolute issue. But again, this is why one reason we've done authors from all different time periods.
Yeah, thank you. I had I will waiting to see if any other questions appear in the chat. But I had a general question for Francesca, and apologies if you already answered this, and I'm maybe asking having missed the point slightly. But as I understand it, you're using automated annotation to build your corpus more quickly, because you need the corpus, and you're using the corpus to ask questions such as different kinds of potential and possibility, constructions in the grammar. Are you able to, is the automated annotation also able to help answer that question directly, or is it purely a tool that you will then use to address that question?
I think that we will be able to answer this question. This is a question I ask myself almost every day, but I think we will be able to answer it when we will have more annotated text, in order to be able to clearly see the correlation between the types of modality, and then what we could have already seen at the level of the grammatical analysis. So like in the case of you have a potest and then you have a perfect infinitive, it is very probable that it is epistemic descent. So it is something, it is a hypothesis about something which has already happened. At the moment, I can't answer, but I hope to be able to answer in, I don't know, 1 year, 2 years. Yeah. Thank you.
So you think that in order to do any sort of probabilistic analysis of the type of modality, as you say, you'll need to have much more hand annotated gold standard data for you to build on.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else in the call want to ask any questions of anyone else or make any comments?
Just a comment, Francesca, thank you for mentioning the Marbarium. I'm happy and frustrated at the same time to see that, of course, the problem is to recognize, to annotate the proper names. But, okay, name entities, which is what I'm working on. But yes, so this is an interesting example. And so, and the message today that we desperately need more annotators, I think it's quite, not only, of course, not only the minor annotations, but I think this is quite clear. So I wanted just to add this. And so thank you for this example. And
on that subject, I've been trying for the last several years, specifically through Sunoikisis, to figure out how we could go about harnessing our students who are learning a bit of tree banking through this. Those who are the most enthusiastic of them, could they do some tree banking which would get into the tree banks, and that would add to this? Because at the moment, they do a bit of tree banking, usually of stuff that's already been tree banked, so they can compare their results, and they're not given the option to submit their tree banks into the corpora. So maybe we could have that conversation in the longer term, possibly not.
They should be able to submit them. Just send them into Zach and put them on the page at Perseus at least.
So,
yeah,
Perseus. Or if they want to annotate papyri, that's also, you can annotate there if you just contact us to give us the rights to annotate in our portal, and the tool is the same, the Aratusa, and we would be happy to get some more data there. I had a question for Francesca.
Please.
Because I had a student who did a master's thesis in tree banking Latin, Varro res rustique text, and he was actually, this is for Vanessa also, that he was tagging the speakers there so that he could see what the speakers actually, where they differ. But he tried some automated annotation. I think he used the UD pipe. Did you test that as well, or is it actually building on the same stanza that you mentioned, or did you try that?
I don't think so, This was work done during the first year of the project, so I have the tendency to forget all what we have done as preparatory work. I can check it with my collaborators, and I can check in the documentation, and so I can answer you at a later moment, if you don't mind. I don't think so, but I'm not 100% sure about it. Yeah.
There is of course the question with the universal dependency system being a little bit different than what we have in AGDT.
Yes.
So there is a difference, but it's possible to have them communicate, but it takes some coding, I guess.
I have to go, so I will see you all later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Cheers. Yeah. Yes, we have. I mean, I think we could carry on talking about specifics for quite a long time, but we're probably we probably ought to let our audience go. As we said, this was a 1 hour 15-minute session. It's gone 1 hour 35 already. There's many other comments in the live chat that I haven't put up because they're not strictly speaking questions. People saying how impressive this is, how exciting this is, and thanking you all for the information. Having said before that, Polly and I should maybe have not tried to squeeze as many speakers into this. I don't know who we would have wanted to leave out because they were all three absolutely essential presentations. So I think there's not any way we could have done this as well with a smaller group. So that was brilliant. We were going to end this session with a brief overview of the exercise that we proposed for this session, but as we're behind time already, Polly has graciously said she'll skip that. If I can just very quickly point out, this is on the session page, which is linked below the YouTube video if you've come to this directly via YouTube and not via Sunoikisis. But I will also share the screen there just to very quickly put that up. Is my screen up? Yes. So there are 3 exercises suggested. The first is using the Paratipa variations tool that Marja showed us earlier, and it suggests a possible question to use that to learn. The second option is using the Iliados structural search tool, which we haven't seen today, but there was a Sunoikisis session on that last year. So if you're very keen to watch that, there's a roughly 20-minute section of that on that, which we've linked to. And there's also the online handbook of that tool, which might be a more efficient way to learn about that, depending on how you prefer to learn. And there's a specific research question you could use that for. And the third question, which we've tagged as optional, but I'm not sure why, because I think this is as good an exercise as the others, is using the WOPOS tools site, which uses the Stanford tools that Francesca's already showed us. And she's got a couple of binders set up in there, which will run their Python scripts. And you don't have to know any Python at all to follow the instructions and run them through and see the results. And I think you can even fairly easily, if you want to, go in and change which texts they're looking at and attempt to work through this. So do attempt those exercises, especially if you're doing this as part of a course where that's obligatory, not just a friendly suggestion. And for whether you're doing this voluntarily or otherwise, if you have any questions, if you have any observations, if you have any technical difficulties getting started or anything else, there is a forum which we have linked. No, which we haven't linked. I will add the link to the page immediately after this session. There's a forum where you can post and you can ask questions, and most of us here will be flagged if you ask a question on that forum. So you should be able to get a technical answer there. That's where we'll stop. I probably spent as long explaining that as Polly would have done going through the exercise in the first place, so apologies. But so thank you all very much again. Thanks to Polly, Marja, and Francesca, and of course to Vanessa, and thanks Monica as well for being here with us. And next week, the session is, if I remember correctly, I don't have the window open in front of me now, is on translation tools. Is that right? Yes. translation technologies, including but not only translation alignment. And so we'll see that then. Please join us then. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.